Thanks, everyone. I'm going to break two cardinal rules of public speaking today. Halfway through the presentation, I'm going to take you on a detour to answer Roger's question from yesterday afternoon's ecosystem services session. And at the end, I'm going to be really controversial and make you forget everything that you probably used. Is this too low? Okay. Shout if there's anything more I need to do to let you hear me. So what are we trying to do with conserving biodiversity? This, I think, goes to the heart of actually some of the mindset shifts that I've had to make in my journey as a conservation professional. For me, I think the first and the most important thing that we should be doing, our value proposition to this country, is that we're trying to protect and maintain the ecological infrastructure that this country depends on. If we get that right, maybe we can also look at providing a platform to allow, support, promote livelihoods from nature. And once we've done that, maybe then we should be able to look at protecting special places, maybe even species after that. In my heart, these things were the other way around. But actually, I think if we're going to be successful at securing the kind of resources, the political airtime, everything else that we need to make a success of what we're doing, we need to first and foremost deal with the ecological infrastructure arguments that conservation provides. So how do we go about doing that? One of probably the only real tool that we have to proactively go out and secure things is stewardship. There are other ways of doing it, and it's actually quite interesting for me that very few of them have been profiled at this session tomorrow. There's a little bit on offsets I see coming later in the day. And also we tend to think about stewardship with a capital S as this really formalized approach to do it. But actually stewardship is about creating a relationship with the person or the people that are looking after or living in the places that we're trying to conserve. It's about trying to build a security for the biodiversity assets that we're really interested in. It's about improving the management regime for those assets. And it's about maintaining the relationship with those people over a long period of time. And for me, one of the key mistakes that we've made as a conservation sector is to put stewardship into a program in a little corner of the organization and under resources and all of those kind of things. Stewardship outcomes, I think, need to be in the KPAs from the CEO to the most junior law admin clerk. I was really heartened to see yesterday in yesterday afternoon session, Joe and Sam and the project that they were talking about just south of Somkanda, that one of their outcomes as a sort of social ecology engagement was a stewardship outcome for protected environment around a little community. That for me is really heartening. If we can take stewardship out of a program mindset and put it into the organization as a whole, we'll be getting somewhere. But we don't really understand the incentives for private landowners, for communities that really allow stewardship to function. Our enforcement must be a hell of a lot sharper if we want to get anything done. And we can certainly make it so much easier, totally internally in the things that we have under our control to get stuff to happen. There's a whole bunch of current financial incentives. I'm not going to bore you with the details. There's property rates exclusions, there's tax breaks. They're useful, but they're not enough. Bizarrely, ecotourism, one of the most compatible livelihoods that we have with maintaining biodiversity and ecological infrastructure, is penalized in the current Rates Act. And the proposals that are going through Parliament in the next few months are going to make it even more penalized. We can talk about some of the specifics afterwards if you really would like to. There's a whole bunch of tax breaks, getting cash back for the kind of investments that you make to clear aliens, fix dongas, etc., etc. But they have seriously limited appeal. You need to have a really big tax exposure to SARS before they really start to make sense to you. They're basically on a par with farming. We're not really incentivizing conservation as a land use over farming. They're limited to 10% of anyone's tax liability. That's just not going to do it. But there's a whole bunch of other things. We tend to focus on the kind of financial stuff. There's a whole bunch of other things that I think have been far more responsible for yielding successful stewardship outcomes across the length and breadth of the country. Some folks just want game, some folks just need a little bit of fencing, some folks just need a little bit of access to some of our natural resource management programs. In some cases, it seems that even just a sort of a way to access social grant support through stewardship yields biodiversity outcomes on the ground. In some of our biggest successes to date, the real thing that's driven landowners to contribute and to set stuff aside is so that they can try and prevent mining from destroying their livelihoods. All of these things require a dedicated partner and supporter, and unless conservation agencies in this country can provide that kind of service to landowners, we're not really going to win. We just don't yet have the mindset, the people, the approach, the training to get that kind of partner and supporter approach out to landowners. Many of them would much rather engage with NGOs than with the state. There's a whole bunch of better incentives. I've been working for a couple of years with National Treasury and Sanby and some other folks to really gear up the kind of financial stuff that we can offer. Try to make all conservation expenditure deductible, make it a completely cash back exercise, make the entire value of the land that you set aside for conservation in the long term deductible from any tax liability that you have over a period of 20 years. Treasury are really interested. They're really keen. They want to do this. They just haven't had the arguments made to them properly by us to actually let this happen. But you know, to be quite honest, I actually don't think financial incentives are going to make a difference in the long run. What we need to do is to figure out how to leverage investment from the services that all of our stewardship sites, all of our special sites across the landscape, and the ecological infrastructure that we're trying to protect, whether it's in our formal reserves or outside our reserves. Unless we can leverage investment from those that benefit from that stuff, we're not going to win the game at the end of the day. The fundamental mechanism that we have to do that is through the water economy. So the question was asked yesterday, why have we not been able to get this right? We've known about this for at least the last 10 years. We've done study after study. We've generated number after number. Nothing's really changed. So Roger asked the question why, and now the detour starts. The Grasslands program in Sanby and with its partners try to start unearthing why things weren't really changing. This builds on the work of Kevin's uncle and a whole bunch of others. There's conceptual problems, there's legal problems, there's institutional problems, financial problems. I'm only going to deal with the first two, but the last two are actually where the real nitty-gritty needs to change. But unless we get the first two right, it's all redundant. So why has there been no progress? We haven't convinced the main players that we have a value offering, that ecological infrastructure really is an important part of the water economy. And I'll show you a picture now that'll hopefully explain that a little better. Certainly, the senior planners, the senior officials in water affairs don't recognize ecosystem services. If they do recognize them, they certainly don't value them as we think they should be valued. They certainly haven't put costs to them. They're incredibly skeptical of the likely benefits. We've been hammering on alien clearing. It's relevant in a very few catchments around the country. Soil erosion and water quality are far more important, yet we haven't really got the arguments, the demonstration sites that show how protecting and improving biodiversity really has good outcomes in erosion and water quality. The current legal regime, as bizarre as it might seem, prevents any payment for ecosystem service scheme emerging. We have a water resource management charge and our water pricing strategy, which I'll unpack just now, which forces everyone to sort of nominally pay for this ecosystem service. Yet the way it's done, the amounts that are collected or not collected, the way they're routed, absolutely kills any PES scheme. Even the language of PES has been an obstacle. People don't want to pay for things, especially things that they should be getting for mahala. Buyers are also very skittish. There's 60,000 buyers of water in the country. I bet you guys didn't know that. Mostly water boards, a few small schemes, large users. That's really who buys water. And they already pay a water resource management charge to water affairs. They are not going to pay anything additional for any additional water services unless they can be convinced and unless it's really clarified for them exactly why. any small monies that would be collected would go into a massive hole in the Department of Water Affairs trading account. It's 2.1 billion rand in debt this year. It has been for roughly the last 10 years. So that's really not going to solve the problem for us. This is a graphic that emerged in a Treasury study in the water value chain. It was done this year. I'd like those who don't know, and there's at least 2 of you, to tell me what the problems are with this graphic and why this demonstrates fundamentally the conceptual problems we've had in selling biodiversity, ecosystem services, and the ecological infrastructure that provides it all to the guys that control the money. And it's not just because they lifted this from an American publication. Water doesn't come from a lake. It comes from catchments. It doesn't get there by pipes. It goes there in rivers. And when it's dirty and it's getting discharged, it doesn't go back in pipes either. It goes there in rivers and through wetlands and stuff. So they don't even see everything that we're on about, everything that we're trying to protect. It's not even in their frame of reference. We have to fix that. From those guys that deal with water every day, this is the eThekwini water reconciliation strategy. They also don't really think about ecosystems and what they can benefit. Each of those big horizontal bars is the kind of long-term sustainable system yield that they can be assured of delivering 98 years out of 100. eThekwini has been living on borrowed time since 2004. Above average rain in the catchment has yielded a surplus that the little black line, which is the actual water use, can then sell. So minor drought even, that takes us way below that solid line, below 350, is going to really put things in trouble. I would not want to be an irrigation farmer in the top of this catchment when there's a massive metropolis down there that's going to be seriously in the red. So we've got Spring Grove, we've got all these other sort of augmentation schemes happening. Even if they happen fantastically on time, on budget, whatever, they're still not going to get eThekwini out of the trouble. Those dotted lines and the curves going up are their projected water use. The projected water use is actually below what's really happening as well. So that gives you some indication. There's nothing in here about the role that ecosystems can play in dealing with their trouble. Fortunately, the guy who's really in charge of all this recognizes that they've been missing this part of the picture and they're really keen to figure out exactly what they can do. But where's the document, where's the study, where's the well-argued, well-thought-through proposal that says, guys, in this beautiful Umgeni and Top Moy catchments that we have, this is what you can do to invest in ecological infrastructure. That will also, oh, by the way, just conserve a whole bunch of stuff that we're really interested in. I don't know if that study exists. I certainly don't know what it's going to cost to clear and maintain this catchment. That's our fault. We should be fixing that. No, that's all right. Thanks, man. Also, ecosystems are very tricky little beasts. They have massive inherent weaknesses that we have to acknowledge. Otherwise, there's a serious potential for oversell. That's been alluded to a couple of times. They're dynamic and they're seriously unpredictable. Responses can lag. So whatever we do, we might only see the benefit a few years down the line. There's been this dominant mindset that, you can only really get some benefit or some payment if we go and do a massive big restoration effort and add some additional value to the system. We need to turn that mindset on its head and be claiming a rightful share of the water economy just to maintain it at its current level, not even just to restore it. All those land users that are going to have to be doing or suffering through lots of this restoration and maintenance don't actually directly benefit. The benefits all accrue downstream in the catchment. The benefits are exceptionally hard to show. They're very difficult to quantify and they're impossible to value. Maybe not impossible, but they're pretty hard to value. That's another thing that we really have to get right. We are, as a matter of interest, we're at the same level now in terms of our ability to monitor rainfall and water flow in rivers as we were in 1950. It's not acceptable, guys. We've really got to fix that. And probably the most important benefit of having healthy, intact ecosystems is avoiding the damage to infrastructure that's happening now all over the Eastern Cape that we've seen elsewhere, We've got no framework for valuing that for the country, for Treasury. Treasury has to fork out billions every year in fixing infrastructure that's been trashed by things that we could certainly have mitigated through well-conserved ecosystems. So our promise, though, even though we know that these are these inherent weaknesses, we have to promise that the future is going to be much easier to handle with intact, healthy ecosystems. Digging down a little bit now into the water price, some of the nitty-gritties here. The top 4 little bars there, the blue and the green, that's the raw water price. That's what everyone should be paying. There's a water resource management charge component of that, which is made up of 11 different little things, including paying for geohydrologists, paying for the reconciliation strategies. One of those little line items is maybe, if you feel like it and you really have nothing else to do, go and check out how much clearing the aliens is going to cost and see if people are willing to pay for it. That's the only reference, even though it's in the water pricing strategy, it's been there for almost 10 years, that we have to actually recover something from the water price to invest in ecosystems. There's a possibility in the water board charges or the municipal charges down the bottom to also extract value to invest in ecosystems. We're just beginning to figure out if it's possible or not. But how am I doing for time, maybe? Lots. No, that's all right. The possibilities are there to do it elsewhere, but unless we actually start grappling with this and put some real numbers on the table, we're not going to win the game. The water pricing strategy is up for review. It's an 18-month process. We're halfway through it. I'm the only greenie in the room. We need a lot more greenies there. The realities. Water price is a negotiated process. Agriculture and forestry last time just said no, we're not going to pay. So they were given caps. Those caps increase at CPIX. Agriculture is paying about 1.5 cents per kilolitre for water at the moment. Forestry about 10 rand a hectare. The absolute maximum, those are the caps that they're sitting at. Mostly they pay even less than that. What it really costs, on the other hand, we don't really know, but it's probably an order of magnitude more than that. Water affairs in the last 10 years haven't really costed what it costs to put water from an ecosystem into their built infrastructure. And alien control, despite our best efforts, 15, 17 years of working for water, I can't find a single example where the costs of controlling aliens in any catchment have been included in the raw water management price. So with the result that this financial year, 29 million rand from the Department of Water Affairs goes to working for water. That's the sum total that we can extract. Unless we can put at least 2 zeros onto the end of that, we're not going to win the game. So what do we need? How do we fix this? We need a 2-tiered approach to the pricing strategy. And I think this is kind of important. If you want to pay attention to anything, please, this would be useful to take away. We need to factor into the National Water Resource Management Charge the cost of all ecological restoration, not just clearing aliens. Fixing all the other little things, dongas, infiltration, wetlands, whatever else. It's kind of got to go to the natural resource management programs. That's the only place that we can put it legally at the moment. We need to figure out better means of extracting it from them and investing it where it really is going to make a difference. It's got to be unrequited. People who pay the charge can't actually expect anything direct back for it. We've got to use it to cross-subsidize things. So people that can pay in certain catchments need to be able to cross-subsidize it in other catchments. And we can keep this figure modest. This maybe 2 cents a kilolitre is fine for this. If we do that, we'll still generate over 900 million rand a year, which is their current budget, again. But where it really gets interesting, at a CMA or at a municipal level, we can have a real ecological infrastructure charge. It can be focused, it can be costed and planned, put into exactly the most important things to do in that catchment that are going to yield the best return on investment. We're going to have demonstrable benefits, have to put in the monitoring, result in really local investment, not just of the money, but of the commitment of the folks in that catchment to make it work. It's got to be at least around a kilolitre, otherwise people aren't really going to pay attention to it. This is only going to be paid by the businesses, industries and consumers in the large metros and towns. They can afford it. Trust me, they can afford it. We've got to get better at covering it and turning off people's water to a trickle if they don't pay it, but that's a whole nother story. But unless we have a unified green lobby from across the length and the breadth of the biodiversity sector, I don't think this is going to hit the radar of the folks involved in determining the water pricing strategy. This is the money that we need to secure the biodiversity in this province and in most of the other catchments around the country. We have a really powerful story to tell. I'm going to come back now to the core of the talk. This is right next to the road on the entrance to one of your fantastic little reserves. This is 1 minute up that road. This lady walks an hour to get there so that she can pick clean water from the forest to take back home so she doesn't get sick. You try to take water from that little part of the river. That's a really powerful story that we have to share. We can replicate this around this province, around this country. This is the kind of things that appeals to water decision makers, to municipal engineers that have to provide services to people, but we're just not making the arguments coherently enough. All of that's not going to make any difference unless we can fix enforcement. This is a catchment to the north of you guys. The catchment was already stressed and over-allocated in 1998. The red, by the way, is sugarcane. There's a hell of a lot more sugarcane in 2004, and I shudder to think what the picture looks like now. Not a single prosecution. All of that is illegal. The big 5 laws of enforcement. If we're going to do anything to secure biodiversity in this country, I think these are the 5 things that we have to fix. A 30-meter riparian buffer across all real little streams, tributaries, and main stems. Big thing to do. Virgin soil cultivation, put a complete stop to it in any area that's even remotely important. Seriously start dealing with invasive species, those that are going to cause trouble, not the little scruffy herbaceous things on the coast that we're probably not going to be able to do anything about anyway. Deal with illegal abstraction, it's rife across the length and the breadth of the country, and start properly addressing wastewater pollution. Whether people have permits or not, wastewater is possibly the biggest issue in water engineers and planners' minds at the moment. Not just from failing sewage works, but non-point sources, dairy farms, piggeries, butcheries, etc. How does this compare to the KPAs of DCO or any other environmental management inspector in the province? How does it compare to water affairs officials' enforcement profile? Who knows how many officials there are, blue scorpions, enforcing the Water Act in this country? Numbers, throw numbers. In this province or the country? There are 11 in the country. I think they have 19 posts, but I think 11 are filled. Unless we can put a 0 on the end of that, we are going to be in deep trouble. DAF, their land use and soil management brass, their resource auditors, are supposed to enforce at least 3 of those things, but they're not really getting to it. There's only one extension officer enforcer for the entire Western Cape. I don't know about this province. Unless we can find some synergy between the environment sector, the conservation agencies, the water affairs officials, and agriculture, forestry, and fisheries officials, and figure out how to really make this enforcement work, even if we forget all other wildlife enforcement, all other wildlife crimes, unless we fix this, boy, I think we're in trouble. So how do we make it simpler, better, and faster? We have massively over-engineered the stewardship process. It's too long, it's too complicated. We're getting the people that really should be our best friends offside. We're making it impossible for us to even manage this process. It's too strict. We are far too selective about who we let into this special little fold. I know we have to prioritize in some way because there's just massive capacity constraints, but we have to start opening up, and we have to start making this more people's responsibility in conservation agencies. The approval processes are tortuous, both internally in the organization, through levels of committees and things, and once it gets to the politicians, the risk takers that have to sign things, we've made it way too hard. We've got to massively simplify it and take it out of a political realm into an administrative signature. And we invest far too much up front. Really, the gains are going to be coming from long-term relationships, making sure that our gains hold in the long term. We've got to shift our focus to extension support. We've got to change the way we think about grading the posts. They're not entry-level posts. They should be exit-level posts when you're most experienced and know how to deal with stuff on the ground. It's got to affect how we select DCOs, how we train them. It's got to affect our auditing of sites. And maybe then we can start yielding some long-term outcomes. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Mark. That was quite disturbing. We're in deep trouble. I have a lot of questions, but I won't abuse my position as chair to ask them. So, audience, questions for Mark. We've got 8 minutes, actually, which is quite nice for questions. Over there. There's a roving mic. Okay.
How did you come up with that particular number? Situation every now and then where you have to, we say, okay, we want a 30-meter buffer, and the question then is, well, why 30? Why can't you pull it down to 10 because you're being impractical?
What does the law say at the moment? What does the law say at the moment?
I don't know, I must admit.
The agricultural regulations are 10 meters. But it's from the edge or the middle or the highest point. It's very difficult to know exactly where that line is. The NEMA regulations are hitting now at 32. How many prosecutions have we had on that? None, exactly. If we had to pull everyone back 30 meters from a river in this province, we'd be sacrificing 100,000 hectares of productive agricultural land and get the entire farming sector offside. This is going to be the most difficult challenge. We've got to figure out how we can have long-term permanent crops, or at least no tillage approaches or something else in those riparian areas. 30 meters has emerged from several international studies. It's probably just a best guesstimate, to be quite honest. That's manageable. It's something that you can pace out and visualize. A more difficult issue is actually figuring out where to start measuring from. The edge of the river, the edge of the hydromorphic soils, the top of the channel, where does it flood to? The 1 in 50-year flood lines, all meaningless anyway. Those are the real issues to grapple with. But a 30-meter, you can have a discussion with the farmer about what's good, what's not so good.
Thanks.
Sorry, long-winded answer.
Mark, I just want to go back to the issue of incentives that you were talking about. And you were saying what landowners need. The research we've been doing suggests we also need to look at what landowners need to give. And what I think is really critical is this idea of individual versus communal rights. And I think we've got to start thinking in landscape terms, and that's not what I'm seeing in conservancies. So I think that needs to become one of the issues that we should be adding to the suite of things that you're raising with us.
Mark, you end up actually saying, blaming us. We are not producing convincing, comprehensive rationale or argument for what we think is the best decision to make, the right decision that has to be made. What is the solution? How do we improve our skills and our expertise to become more convincing? What is necessary? Is it a matter of training? What do we have to do?
We had some big floods, 2006. In fact, we had a 1 in 50-year flood every year for 7 years in the Southern Cape, which makes me wonder about what it is. We didn't jump into our buckies, race off with our cameras, and photograph every single instance we found where someone who had ploughed illegally had resulted in the whole field being washed away and the bridge that cost 200 million rand downstream being taken out. It's happening right now in the Eastern Cape. We should be there documenting it, building the stories, an evidence-based approach to say this is why you've got to invest in ecological infrastructure. I don't think it's an economic argument. I don't even think it's a financial argument, to be quite honest. we've got a whole lot of groundwork to do to put the conceptual understanding in decision makers' minds that we rely on ecosystem integrity fundamentally. Once we've got that understanding that there's a real issue here, then we can start making the arguments. We can start demonstrating with measurements. We can start showing improved flows from catchments that are cleared and restored versus catchments that are just left. I don't think just making more numbers is going to do it. If anything, the numbers that we've generated so far have made the recipients more skeptical. They don't. The Dwyer Water Affairs planners, guys, have completely rejected the CSIR's numbers on the benefits of working for water. Completely rejected. Whether they're right or wrong is actually irrelevant. They don't believe those numbers. I'm not so sure that they believe the numbers that we've generated about what the costs and benefits are from catchment restoration here. Unless we really take their hands and walk them through the process. And if you read the National Water Resource Strategy, which is currently out for comment, I would urge everyone to read Section C of it, at least, the spatial perspectives. The Dwyer Water Resource Planners there tell us, quite indirectly, exactly which catchments in the country they think need ecological management. And it very clearly should focus our work on where they think we can help them. Once we do that, then I think they'll start getting used to the idea of maybe there really is a good value offering from ecological infrastructure.